Welcome back, everybody, as we dive into the last part of the Kennedy assassination inside the book Depository. If you have not seen the first 3 episodes of my breakdown of this fantastic documentary that just came out on YouTube about a week ago, the link is in the description. It'll take you all the way back to the beginning of episode 1. We broke it down into 4 kind of manageable bites because this is an hour and 38 minutes long, and probably my breakdown of it all is going to end up being about 2.5 to 3 hours by the time we're all done with it. So also, please check out the original content creator. He has a lot of fantastic stuff. Let's go ahead and dive into the last few chapters, the alibis, the lineup, and the ending.
After escaping the book Depository, Oswald boarded a bus right about here. But the assassination ground traffic to a halt, so Oswald soon left the bus and hailed a cab. After returning to his rooming house in Oak Cliff, a neighborhood in southwestern Dallas, Oswald changed his clothes, grabbed a gun, and left in a hurry.
78. You are in the Oak Cliff area, are you not? The line's too low. You will be at large for emergency comes in. Telephone.
Police patrolman J.D. Tippett encountered Oswald some 45 minutes after the shooting, a bit further south, right about here.
So, important to note here, and some of you have pointed this out, that where J.D. Tippett encounters Oswald is not part of Tippett's regular patrol area. But what has happened is, because of the assassination, the Dallas police have been ordered to basically close in closer to the center of the city so that they can be on the lookout for this suspect. And so Tippett has moved closer toward the location of the assassination from his regular beat.
As soon as Tippett stepped out of the vehicle, Oswald drew his gun and fired 4 shots in rapid succession.
So I talked a little bit about this already yesterday because I didn't know he was going to get into it today. But Tippett initially, he hears the bolo, the be on the lookout for, the description of the suspect, and he very quickly spots Oswald walking down the street after Oswald has left his rooming house. He's got the gun. When they arrest him later, he's got the gun stuffed down the front of his pants. But he pulls up alongside of him and starts talking to him out the window, but then he stops to get out, and when he gets out and starts walking around in front of the car, that's when Oswald shoots him. Most witnesses say 4 or 5 shots. We know there were 3 that hit Tippett.
Hello, police operator. Go ahead, Assassination News. Hello, we've had a shooting out here. Where is it at? Between Marsalis and Buckley. It's a police officer. Somebody shot him. What's this? 404 10th Street. 78.
You could hear all the people in the background. There were a number, I think something like a dozen or more witnesses to Oswald shooting Tippett or running in the immediate aftermath. And yeah, they get on and they call the police. This happens about 1:15, and by like 1:25, Tippett has been taken to the hospital and pronounced dead. And Oswald starts heading toward the movie theater, which is less than a mile away.
Then a police car. Notify one that the officer involved in the shooting, which is Officer J.D. Tippett, we believe, was pronounced DOA at Methodist 128. Well, any indication that it has any connection with this other shooting? Well, the descriptions on the suspects are similar. It is possible.
Oswald was then caught sneaking into a nearby movie theater without purchasing a ticket.
We have information that a suspect just went in the Texas theater on West Jefferson.
And I had somebody yesterday comment and say, well, there was no way that he could have made it from the Tippett shooting to the Texas theater without sprinting, and nobody saw him sprint. That is completely false. It's 0.7 of a mile walking distance from the Tippett shooting to the Texas theater. The theater's still there. Easily walkable in 25 minutes, which is how long it was between when he shot Tippett and when he's seen going into the theater at around 1:40. And within 5 minutes of him going to the theater, there's a call that comes in, and another 5 minutes after that, they arrest him.
A large contingent of officers descended upon the theater. They surrounded the building, switched on the lights, and approached the suspect. Flanked by officers, Oswald drew a gun, and a brief scuffle ensued. But this time he was quickly subdued, handcuffed, and taken to police headquarters back in downtown Dallas.
I've read, and I don't know if there's a number of accounts of this, but I've read at least one account where he actually pulled the trigger on the gun and a piece of cloth or something got stuck in the hammer, and that's what prevented it from going off. I don't know if that's true or not.
Over the next 2 days, between his arrest and untimely death, Lee Harvey Oswald was interrogated by members of the Dallas Police, FBI, Secret Service, among others.
Everybody wanted a
None
piece
of
of
it was recorded.
Did you have any tape recorders?
No, sir. I don't have a tape recorder. We need one. If we had one at this time, we could have handled these conversations far better.
The Dallas Police Department doesn't have one.
No, sir. I have requested one several times, but so far, they haven't gotten me one.
So, no one knows exactly what was said inside this room. Instead, we have to settle for the Cliff Notes, and of especial interest to us is Oswald's alibi.
These people have given me a hearing without legal representation or anything.
Did you shoot the president?
I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir.
You just heard Oswald, who said he did not shoot anybody.
Oswald vehemently denied any involvement in the assassination. Instead, he claimed to have eaten lunch with 2 co-workers on the first floor of the Book Depository. One of them was a black co-worker whose name Oswald could not recall. The other was James Jarman.
Were you with anybody when you were walking around on the first floor finishing your sandwich?
No, I wasn't. I was trying to get through so I could get out on the street.
Did you see Lee Oswald?
No, I didn't.
After his arrest, he stated to a police officer that he had had lunch with you. Did you have a lunch with him?
No, sir, I didn't.
It's interesting that Oswald, in offering his alibi, would specifically name someone. Because if he didn't have lunch with that person, it would be very easy to discredit his alibi. It seems that if he was going to make something up, he'd probably just say he didn't know. But then again, maybe he's not thinking clearly. I don't understand this at all, why he would do this.
But according to another interrogator, Oswald's claim was not to have eaten lunch with Jarman and this unnamed co-worker, but merely that he saw them pass through the lunchroom while he was eating.
Oswald stated that he had eaten lunch in the lunchroom at the Texas School Book Depository alone, but recalled possibly 2 black employees walking through the room during this period.
Now, I can see how this could have been misconstrued by the earlier investigator if Oswald had said something like, I was eating lunch in the lunchroom, and they asked him, well, were anybody else there? And he could have said, well, these guys were there. And that could have been interpreted as they were also sitting and eating lunch, or that they happened to be in the room. So this is why a recording would really be helpful, or exact transcription.
He stated possibly one of these employees was called Junior, and the other was a short individual whose name he could not recall, but whom he would be able to recognize.
So, according to this version of events, Oswald's alibi was that he possibly saw 2 co-workers, one whose name he could not recall, enter and traverse the lunchroom, together or separately, during an unspecified period of time.
So why did he leave?
Whether Oswald claimed to have eaten lunch with or in proximity of his colleagues, it makes no difference because neither alibi could be substantiated.
Neither alibi could be substantiated, and to me, none of this explains why you leave the depository. Only 2 people left. Everybody else stayed there. Why do you leave immediately when the shooting happens? And why do you go to your room and get a gun and then start walking on the street? And why are you hiding in the theater?
James Jarman had last seen Oswald taking an elevator upstairs sometime between 11:30 and 12 o'clock. William Shelley and Eddie Piper had last seen Oswald roaming about the first floor around noon, at which time Oswald had told Piper that he was either going out or going up to eat lunch. Then there's the account of Charles Givens. You may recall that Givens is officially recognized as the last person inside the Book Depository known to have seen Oswald before the assassination. Their encounter was fixed at 11:55 and is supposed to have taken place on the 6th floor. But prior to relating this version of events, Givens had reportedly told the FBI that he saw Oswald on the 1st floor at 11:50, a statement which he later denied ever making. Either way, Oswald being on the 1st floor at noon does absolutely nothing to prevent him from being on the 6th half an hour later. Unless Carolyn Arnold is to be believed.
As Mrs. Arnold was standing in front of the building, she stated she thought she caught a fleeting glimpse of Lee Harvey Oswald standing in the hallway between the front door and the double doors leading to the warehouse.
She thought she caught a fleeting glimpse. That's not exactly a confident eyewitness statement right there.
Located on the 1st floor. She could not be sure that this was Oswald, but she said she felt it was and believed the time to be a few minutes before 12:15 p.m.
Still doesn't prevent him from shooting the president.
So that would be about here. In a subsequent statement, Arnold claimed to have gone outside as late as 12:25, thereby pushing the time of her potential ground floor sighting of Oswald as close as 5 minutes before the shooting. Putting aside the fact that her observation was described as a fleeting glimpse and that she could not be certain of the man's identity, Arnold herself will later deny it ever happened.
That is completely foreign to me. It would have forced me to have been turning back around to the building when, in fact, I was trying to watch the parade. Why would I be looking back inside the building? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Instead, Arnold claimed that this encounter had actually taken place in the second-floor lunchroom.
I do not recall that Oswald was doing anything. I just recall that he was sitting there in one of the booth seats on the right-hand side of the room as you go in. He was alone, as usual, and appeared to be having lunch.
Now that's a very specific statement. She's saying exactly what seat he was in. She's saying she doesn't really recall much other than where he was sitting and the fact that he was by himself.
I did not speak to him, but I recognized him clearly.
And that was
the problem in both of these
recognition.
accounts is that none of her colleagues reported anything remotely similar. Whether it was the first or second floor, Oswald was apparently invisible to everyone but Arnold. Besides, it took Arnold 15 years to relate her revised version of events.
And remember what I said yesterday, when you're getting that far out from the events, honestly, there's a lot that can have gone wrong in the meantime, and there's a lot you could remember differently. You know, I don't know if this happens with you, but I've noticed it happens with me. Because I'm a public speaker and I go into schools and do the same presentation many times over in different places over the years. Sometimes when you're telling a story, you add a word or phrase that you hadn't used before, and then you find yourself using that word or phrase every time moving forward when you share that story, and then you think you always have shared it that way because that's how you remember it. That's happened with me. Certain ways that I present certain information, at some point I look back at the original and I'm like, oh wait, I wasn't saying that then. When did I start saying that? I thought that was always there. That can happen with these recollections as well.
Not ideal for such a time-sensitive issue. That being said, depending on what conspiracy theory you're willing to entertain, there are ways to interpret what Oswald told his interrogators so that it aligns with either one of Arnold's accounts. Take this one for instance.
Oswald stated he was present for work at the book depository on the morning of November the 22nd, and at noon went to lunch. He went to the second floor to get a Coca-Cola and returned to the first floor to eat lunch. Then he went outside to watch the presidential parade.
This claim is interesting because in the early days of the assassination, it appeared to be supported by photographic evidence. But this figure was quickly identified as Billy Lovelady, a man who bore such a close resemblance to Oswald that when footage of Oswald first appeared on television, Lovelady's stepchildren thought it was him.
Yeah, and that's absolutely, I mean, you can tell even in that blurry picture, it's not Oswald, it's definitely Lovelady. They do have some similarities though.
Now, speaking only for myself here, really? Am I missing something here? Because they're not exactly doppelgangers, right? Anyway, in recent years, another such figure, this time with even fewer pixels to work with, has once again been the subject of debate. Because this much of a person can't be positively identified, some believe it, therefore, must be Oswald.
Here's the bottom line with all of this. And this is just me personally looking at this. This was such a big deal. The murder of a U.S. president at a time of very tense foreign relations and all that sort of stuff. He's a young guy. He's a World War II veteran, a hero from World War II, getting ready for re-election. People don't want to believe that a single person acting basically without a whole lot of forethought could pull something like that off. And so we naturally want to believe there has to be something bigger at play. We want to believe there has to have been some big government conspiracy or some mob conspiracy, because no one man can take it upon himself to change history like this. But sometimes that's exactly what happens. And so then once you've committed to the idea of there being a conspiracy, you will see evidence everywhere of that conspiracy, even in a pixelated photo that could be 1,000 different people. Well, because we don't know who it is, it must be Oswald.
On the other hand, Oswald explicitly denied watching the motorcade when he spoke with another interrogator, not to mention that his presence outside went completely unnoticed by all those who did watch the motorcade. Now, there's one final account of Oswald's supposed alibi that stands out from the rest. It stands out because it really skirts the line of self-incrimination.
When asked as to his whereabouts at the time of the shooting, Oswald stated that when lunchtime came and he didn't say which floor he was on, he said one of the black employees invited him to eat lunch with him, and he stated, "You go on down and send the elevator back up, and I will join you in a few minutes." Before he could finish whatever he was doing, he stated the commotion surrounding the assassination took place. And when he went downstairs, a policeman questioned him as to his identification, and his boss stated that he is one of our employees.
Which we know happened. That was described by eyewitnesses that saw Oswald in the aftermath of the shooting inside.
Whereupon the policeman had him step aside momentarily. Following this, he simply walked out the front door of the building.
If this is an accurate recollection of what Oswald said, he placed himself on a floor above the second at the time of the shooting. While he neglected to mention which floor, he described a conversation between himself and an unnamed black co-worker, which sounds remarkably similar to the one described by Charles Givens. This would mean that Oswald, seemingly by accident, placed himself on the 6th floor during the shooting. After that horribly confusing mishmash of stories, what have we learned? Well, Oswald appears to have contradicted himself by offering multiple alibis. It's also possible that what he said was misunderstood or otherwise misrepresented by the interrogation participants. As mentioned at the beginning of all this, we don't actually know what Oswald said. This is all based on second-hand accounts related days, weeks, or even months after the assassination. But the main takeaway has to be the lack of corroboration. With the exception of Carolyn Arnold, a highly unreliable witness, no one laid eyes on Oswald between roughly noon and the shooting. At least, no one inside the book Depository. Among those who witnessed the sniper in the sniper's nest, Howard Brennan was the only one who thought he could identify the gunman. At least, that's what he stated initially. Within a few hours of the shooting, Brennan had become far less certain.
Upon arrival at the police station, Mr. Brennan said, "I don't know if I can do you any good or not, because I've seen the man that they have under arrest on television." And he's
So, just in terms of context, if you have not seen the film Parkland, which follows a lot of these events, it's really, really well done. Shows, the doctors, shows it was a Zapruder film afterwards and how it was discovered and analyzed and everything. And I believe that this character, the character of Forrest Sorrells, was played by Billy Bob Thornton in the movie.
He said, "I just don't know whether I can identify him positively or not." Because he said that the man on television was a bit disheveled and his shirt was open or something like that. And he said, "The man I saw in the book Depository was not in that condition."
Brennan was then brought down to the basement of the police station to view a lineup of suspects. Among them was Oswald.
Mr. Brennan looked very carefully and he said, "I cannot positively say." I said, "Well, is there anyone there that looks like the man in the book Depository?"
Now here's the trouble with this identification. He's already acknowledged seeing Oswald on TV, and he's already in his mind made a comparison between the guy he saw on TV and the guy he saw in the book Depository and whether or not he thinks they're the same or not. So honestly, it's really, this identification would probably not stand up in court for that reason.
He said, "Well, that second man from the left, who was Oswald, he looks like him." Then he repeated that the man he saw in the book Depository was not disheveled.
So that's not ideal. While Brennan did pick Oswald from a lineup, that identification was far from certain. But if Brennan is to be believed, this uncertainty was not genuine, but merely an act intended to protect his family.
I believed at that time, and I still believe, the assassination was a communist activity. and I felt like there hadn't been more than one eyewitness. And if it got to be a known fact that I was an eyewitness, my family or I, either one, might not be safe.
Well, if you wouldn't have identified Oswald during the lineup, might he not have been released by the police?
No, I already knew they had the man for murder, and I knew he would not be released.
The murder of whom?
Of Officer J.D. Tippett.
Well, what happened in between to change your mind that you later decided to come forth and tell the FBI that you could identify him?
After Oswald was killed, I was relieved quite a bit that as far as pressure on myself of somebody not wanting me to identify anybody, there was no longer that immediate danger.
That's understandable.
Mr. Brennan, could you tell us now whether you can or cannot positively identify the man you saw in the 6th floor window as the same man that you saw in the police station?
I could at that time. I could, with all sincerity, identify him as being the same man.
So it's a very understandable fear that he had. We got to remember that, again, tensions are really high. There's a lot of fear of communism in the United States. You had the Bay of Pigs and then the Cuban Missile Crisis. You've got Red Scares happening. And this was an understandable fear. But unfortunately, as far as credibility goes, I'm not sure he's got a lot at this point.
So, according to Brennan, within a few hours of the assassination, he'd become concerned that it was the product of a communist conspiracy. He feared that should he attempt to identify the gunman, he could become a target and thereby endanger his family.
Did you and your wife discuss any aspect of the assassination and you being present more or less at the scene of the assassination?
Yes, we discussed it. We talked. I talked of moving her and my grandson, who was living with us at that time, and my daughter, moving them out of town somewhere in secrecy. My wife seemed to think that a person can't get away wherever they go.
So when Brennan was brought down to view a lineup later that evening, he feigned uncertainty to protect his family. At least, so he claimed. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether to believe or disbelieve Brennan's story.
If we're looking at this from the standpoint of what would happen in testimony in a court of law, I think the defense would probably rip a guy like this to shreds, and you'd have to throw him out.
On Sunday morning, November the 24th, Oswald was scheduled for transfer from the city to the county jail. Reporting from outside the police station, a local news correspondent couldn't help but to jinx the whole shebang.
Now, this is the armored truck that will carry Lee Harold Oswald from the basement here of Dallas Police Headquarters downtown to the Dallas County Sheriff's Office and the Dallas County Jail. Strict security precautions have been exercised from the very beginning and have been even increased this morning as fear arises and grows stronger. That's somewhat.
So you hear him describing how strict security is, and this, again, is the kind of stuff that leads to conspiracy theories, right? If security was indeed so strict, how did Jack Ruby get in there? And this leads a lot of people to believe, well, security was strict, somebody let him in on purpose.
May attempt to take the life of the man accused of murdering the President of the United States.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
Could you imagine for a minute? I'm not old enough to remember this. My mom barely old enough to remember this, but imagine watching all of this unfold live, watching the 60s unfold, right? You've got assassinations of JFK, later his brother Robert. You've got the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. You've got Vietnam exploding onto the scene. And then you have this, where somebody goes up and shoots the guy, leaving us with so many questions. Jack Ruby did such a disservice to this country and to history by taking things into his own hands and robbing us of the opportunity to investigate all of this further.
Doctors at Parkland Hospital said that the single shot could scarcely have done more damage to a body than that shot did to Lee Harvey Oswald. It penetrated his spleen, his pancreas, the aorta, the kidney, and the liver.
Oswald expired at 1:07 p.m.
He died?
He died. at 1:07 p.m. We have arrested the man. The man will be charged with murder.
Who is he?
The suspect's name is Jack Rubinstein, I believe. He goes by the name of Jack Ruby. That's all I have to say.
These guys were not happy. This happened on their watch. Now, it's important to note that there were a number of other eyewitnesses who identified him in the lineup, but these were eyewitnesses from the Tippit shooting. So you're not really going to have any credible eyewitnesses that are able, other than the one who can probably be discredited, that actually saw Oswald in the window with the rifle. So the way you tie him to the assassination of Kennedy is through all the other things we've talked about. It's not through a direct eyewitness to the shooting itself. Tippit, different story. Lots of people saw that.
Throughout this video, we've encountered witnesses who not only contradicted each other, but also themselves. Central to many arguments of conspiracies that these contradictions represent attempts by the conspirators to conceal the truth. To give you an example, Charles Givens initially claimed to have seen Oswald on the first floor at 11:50. Then he denied ever saying that and claimed to have spoken with Oswald on the 6th floor at 11:55. Some authors have found this change a bit too convenient and suspected Givens was coerced to change his story by the conspirators.
So again, we talked about this before, right? All of this begins with our own biases and what ideas we have coming into it. If you come at this information from the belief that Oswald committed this murder and acted alone, there's more than enough here for you to say, yeah, this proves it. He did it. There's enough evidence here. If you're coming at it from the opposite, Oswald didn't do it, or he was one of many gunmen, or there was a conspiracy, there's enough here that can cause you to feel like you've seen that argument made.
Out of that conclusion, we have this document in which Dallas Police Lieutenant Jack Revel said the following.
Lieutenant Revel stated that Givens had been previously handled by the Dallas Police Department on a marijuana charge, and he believes that Givens would change his story for money.
About 2 months later, Givens did precisely that. He changed his story. But let's have a think about this. According to this interpretation of events, the conspirators had free rein to dictate Givens' testimony. They could have told him what to say or perhaps rewritten his testimony after the fact. You may recall that that is precisely what Victoria Adams claimed and Carolyn Arnold implied earlier in the video, that someone had put words in their mouth by altering the written record.
And this is my problem with a lot of the conspiracy theories, is that if it is a conspiracy, the conspirators sucked at it because it wasn't clear. If you've got a conspiracy and you've planned this for a while, you've got your ducks in a row a lot better than this. This is haphazard. It's multiple conspiracy theories all being true at the same time. It just doesn't fly for me.
Okay, so wielding that near limitless power, what words did the conspirators choose to put in the mouth of Givens? Well, they supposedly invented a brief conversation about lunch in elevators, away from the sniper's nest, more than half an hour before the shooting.
Not good.
I guess I saw Oswald sitting in the sniper's nest, or even I saw Oswald carrying a large package heading for the sniper's nest, was a bit too on the nose. The same is of course true of every other witness in Dealey Plaza. Apart from the doubtful identification by Howard Brennan, no one could actually place Oswald in the sniper's nest at the time of the shooting.
If you're pinning this on him, you've got at least a couple of witnesses who conclusively saw him in the window. The fact that you don't... See, this is what I say sometimes about eyewitness accounts. If eyewitness accounts are perfect, they're probably not credible. The fact that they're questionable and there's some wiggle room and maybe I saw him, maybe I didn't, I think it was him, but I'm not sure. That to me is more credible than it was definitely him. I absolutely saw him at specifically this time in that window. I saw him fire the gun. That's all too convenient.
I really cannot stress this enough. It apparently did not occur to the conspirators to have at least one witness unambiguously identify Oswald as the assassin.
Yep.
Better yet, take a photograph. for all this talk of witness coercion and evidence tampering, that seems like a bit of an oversight. What I'm trying to illustrate is that it's surprisingly trivial to pluck a stray document here, an unfounded allegation there, and sprinkle in some thoughts about means and motive, and you'll end up with a conspiracy theory that, at least on the surface, sounds convincing. Whether it's organized crime, a foreign government, or domestic agency, there's enough material here to make a compelling case against countless groups and individuals, something upon which many authors, filmmakers, and others have capitalized to great success.
Please do me a favor and don't quote Oliver Stone's movie JFK as being facts, because so much of that stuff is legit just made up, okay? There's no basis in fact for a lot of the stuff that you see presented as facts in that movie. It's long debunked fringe stuff, okay? Again, I'm not saying there could not have been some involvement by somebody here. I'm just saying that there's not this compelling case for it.
I don't know if all of them are right or wrong. This video clearly doesn't cover enough ground for me to determine that. But to ascribe a conspiratorial motive to anything remotely suspicious seems irresponsibly black and white for a case so clouded by shades of grey. A person acting in a way that's unlawful, unethical, untruthful does not prove they colluded in a plot to assassinate the President of the United States. Such thrilling leaps of conspiracy make for entertaining stories, but that doesn't make them true.
And again, for me, this comes down to people want so badly to believe that in order to murder a president, there had to be some grand conspiracy. There had to be some big, powerful backing behind it. We don't want to believe that a single human being can, on a whim, with a couple of days maybe planning, pull something like this off.
Remember Thomas Ollier? He was the journalist filming on the 6th floor during the initial search for the assassin. Decades later, Ollier began accusing officers of tampering with the evidence, staging photographs, and lying on their oath. The veracity of those allegations aside, the fascinating thing about Ollier is that he never believed Kennedy fell victim to a conspiracy. Ollier had a refreshingly nuanced take on the assassination by recognizing that evidence of corruption is not the same as evidence of conspiracy. Sloppy police work neither began nor ended with the Kennedy assassination, and people lie for all sorts of reasons. Loyalty, embarrassment, fear, pride, attention, power, money. There's no shortage of motivations to choose from. Besides, what kind of clueless masterminds would allow a cameraman to casually film their supposed cover-up?
One of the big things that we know definitely happened is that the FBI did have Oswald on their radar screen in the months ahead. Not because they thought he was going to kill the president, but because for many other reasons, especially his communist ties. They had been investigating him. They had talked to him. And you see this in the movie Parkland, where they basically are in CYA mode, and they try to cover up the fact that they had this conversation with him because they don't want it to come back on him or on them that they had the guy who killed the president and didn't stop him. So that's one of those things that leads to the idea of conspiracy.
Something I found myself doing a lot while making this video was attempting to view the assassination from the perspective of the alleged conspirators. You could, for instance, question the logic of placing an assassin in this specific window, a window in which he ran the risk of being caught red-handed by other workers inside the building, a window in which he could have easily been and actually was spotted by spectators in the approaching motorcade, a window from which his view was partially obstructed by a tree. You can also question the logic of using a sniper to shoot at a moving target in the first place, especially when that person had a tendency to stand still in very exposed public places. If Oswald acted alone and the assassination was a crime of opportunity, these less than ideal choices start to make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
He found himself at the right place at the right time, had mere days to prepare, and used the only building to which he had access. But for a group of...
this is not, if you are a well-planned, well-thought-out conspiracy, this is not the ideal place to shoot from because you're really closed off as far as your escape routes go, right? It's not easy to get out of one of the top floors of a building full of people. There's so many other places it would be better to do this. Now, you could make the argument that if it was a conspiracy that was using Oswald with the expectation that he was going to be expendable and that he was going to get caught, then this makes more sense.
Conspirators to handicap their own assassination plot requires a bit more ingenuity to explain. He was a patsy, he was supposed to get caught, there were multiple assassins, you know the drill. But there's so much of that in this case. So much had to go just right for a conspiracy and the subsequent cover-up to succeed. From the roundabout process by which Oswald was hired at the Book Depository to the selection of the motorcade route. From Oswald's narrow escape and subsequent arrest to him being given multiple chances to speak with the press. From the supposed tampering, suppression and planting of evidence to dozens of expert witnesses being successfully fooled or coaxed to lie under oath. Not only would a plan as complex and prolonged as this one have been difficult to predict with countless points of failure, but it seems, and excuse my language here, a bit overkill. Yes, Kennedy was the President of the United States, but he was not exactly difficult to access. He was rather famous for abandoning his Secret Service detail and wandering off into crowds. In fact, that's precisely what he did on multiple occasions during this very trip.
Now decided to shake hands with one or two more people, but this is the moment where the Secret Service has its point of tension. They say when the president stops moving, that's when we're concerned, because that is when the possibility of trouble comes to the forefront.
Imagine the foreshadowing of that guy talking about the Secret Service having a tough job and there being trouble and safety issues on the very day that he gets killed.
It was one of those impromptu moments for which President Kennedy is so well known. So many times you have heard that
It's interesting. I think that's Johnson right there. And boy, he's so much taller than most of the other people around.
Secret Service men suddenly find themselves without the president, that suddenly he has left them and stepped into the crowd and decided to shake hands and give his personal greetings.
Yeah, you gotta hate that
perhaps
for Secret
that this
Service.
is more the norm now than the unexpected, because it has been done so many times.
As this news correspondent was alluding to just a few minutes before the actual shooting, all it takes is one person with a gun at point-blank range.
Yep.
Not unlike the shooting of Oswald. Think about that the next time you watch a documentary or read one of the thousands of books implicating members of the Secret Service, FBI, CIA, Dallas Police Department, politicians, lawyers, doctors, investigators, witnesses, and so forth. Think about how all these alleged co-conspirators did not have to be a part of any of this. Just one.
And here's the thing. Same thing I'll say with things like the moon landing. The number of people that would have to have been involved in some of the conspiracies that are alleged. Nobody has come forward with the smoking gun with the absolute proof. All the people that would have that knowledge, and nobody has come forward. People have come forward and claimed conspiracy, but they haven't been able to prove it. Somebody would be able to come forward and prove this. This comes down to, and several of you have mentioned it, Occam's razor. Sometimes the simplest solution is the one. You start there and work your way up. And the simplest solution is the one we don't want to believe is true, that a lone guy did this.
Person in a crowd whose guilt is assured the moment they pull the trigger. By roping in this ensemble cast of characters, it inadvertently makes the conspirators seem clueless. I like to imagine a conference room, and up against the wall stands a board upon which they've mapped out the whole thing. All the people they need to manipulate, all the evidence they have to fabricate. The entire patchwork of needless risk-taking laid out bare before them. And they looked at that, and then looked at each other and went, "Yep, that's a solid plan." But
that's
even
a great way to
even
present
if we
that.
assume the conspirators didn't really think it through, or, I don't know, made it up as they went along, that doesn't really jibe with them not getting caught. Something that would have taken a lot of planning, skill, and ingenuity. So, I guess you somehow have to convince yourself that they were clueless enough to wing the crime of the century, yet clever enough to get away with it. And therefore, there was no conspiracy. No, I don't believe any of these arguments make it impossible for others to have been involved. They just make it a bit more difficult to keep that tinfoil hat firmly in place.
Yep.
I mean, if there was an argument with which to close the book on this case, I would not be the first to think of it nearly 6 decades and a continent removed from the events in question. I can guarantee you that much. Also, the word conspiracy doesn't even necessarily mean that there were other people involved in the planning and execution of the assassination. For instance, there's what some refer to as a benign conspiracy. This typically means that there was a cover-up, but it was not motivated by the concealment of complicity, as is so often assumed. Instead, Oswald did act alone, but there was some other motive behind the suppression of evidence. A common one.
And I think that's more likely than a conspiracy beforehand.
One being that federal agencies attempted to save face by concealing or downplaying the full extent of their failure to prevent the assassination. I mean, a known communist with ties to Russia blindsiding the entire intelligence community by assassinating the commander-in-chief on a public street in broad daylight at the height of the Cold War is not exactly resume material. Point being that there are countless ways to interpret the evidence in a case as vast as this one. I am not exaggerating when I say that you could easily make dozens of these videos and still have plenty left to talk about. After all, the Texas School Book Depository is but one piece of a much larger puzzle.
That was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And I 100% agree with his conclusions at the end on all of this. But I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comment section below. Consider supporting him on Patreon. I'm heading over there to do it right now. I support a number of other creators, and I'm proud to add him to my list. I want this guy to keep making videos for as long as possible. We are all better off because that channel exists. I hope you enjoyed this series. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.